Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav b'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are starting a section of the Torah, which is the only example that I can think of that comes close to the practice that used to go on. I certainly know that it went on in Old England, called trial by ordeal. And I'm sure some of you are already somewhat familiar with this, but it has to do with what is called the Sotah. And this has to do with a woman who has committed adultery, but without any witnesses. And what happens, and her husband, it does not actually have proof of it, but the husband is overcome with a fit of jealousy. And there is this process which will be described in Parshat Naso as to what you're supposed to do to determine the innocence or the guilt of the woman. And so it's not easy material. Certainly, one has to know that I studied at one point the Mishnah on this. There's an entire tractate of Mishnah on this particular subject. And the requirements that are there for this to actually happen are actually a little bit more developed than are stated explicitly in the Torah. The other thing that you have to know is that at a certain point, when sad to say, there was so much adultery going on that of this kind that they ceased to use this practice. I mean, ceasing to use the practice, of course, I don't think is a terrible thing. It's a pretty humiliating experience for the woman, I have to tell you. So that part of it, of course, is good to know. The sad part of it, of course, is the fact that there was so much adultery going on. That's a very sad commentary there. So we're going to dive into the text itself. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. By the way, if you have a question, because I can't see you on my screen, I only can see my screen. If you use the the part that you have where you can show your reactions and just raise your hand that way, I will see that. Also, if you're not muted, please check and make sure you're muted. And just unmute if you have a question to ask or a comment to make. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. So Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, or to say, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, v'amarta alehem, and say to them. Just want to remind you that the word daber, that we translate as speak, has a harsher connotation than amar, to say. So it could be that when it introduces a mitzvah in this particular way, it's already telling us ahead of time that it's going to be something that may have a certain level of challenge. So here we go. You should say to them, ish, a man. In other words, we could say any man, ki tiste ishto, if his wife goes astray. And we'll discuss this particular word, but here you get the word, of course, sotah, right? Ishto, lots of commentary, uma'ala vo mal, and has, I think it's a nice translation, and broken faith with him. The word lim'ol has a meaning of to defraud. And the same verb is used in terms of personal use of sacred objects. That the sin is called me'ilah. That is the person, as I said, the personal use of sacred objects, which are supposed to be obviously only used for sacred purposes. So it's called me'ilah. Let's take a look at the Rashi on here. And quite a bit of Rashi, as you can see, that is not necessarily so typical, right? Ish ki tiste ishto. Okay. Ma katuv lamala min ha'inyan. So he says, wait a second, what's the context of what we're dealing with here? What is written above from this subject, above this subject? It states, Ve'ish et kadoshav lo yiyeh, right? And as for a man, his sanctified objects shall go to the priest. And what they do is they rework this statement, right? The pshat of the statement is that when a man dedicates objects to the temple, they're to go to the priest, right? Im ata. So here, this is a reworking of that particular sentence. Im ata ma'akev matnot hakohen. If you withhold the gifts due to the priest, chayecha. This is a word that's used in making an oath. By your life, shetitzarech lavo etzlo, you will be required to come to him, lahavi lo et hasotah. By the way, notice how it's spelled a little bit different, that how there's a samach here and tister is with a sin. However, back to the translation, you will need to bring to him, right? You'll have to come to him to bring to him the Sotah. So it's reworking the sense that I was looking at the Sefaria translation of the Rashi, and it had an interesting way of explaining this, right? So, as in this sense, that if a man withholds the sacred dues to a priest, lo yihiyeh, he will become subservient to him. That's how they're understanding law, meaning referring to the man, and in this case, the woman, and because it's yihiyu, right? They shall be. That's, of course, referring to Kadoshav, his sanctified objects, right? And the simple meaning of the sentence. But in this reworked meaning, it's under the yihiyu is understood to refer back to the man and the woman. Onwards. Ish, another interesting way of understanding this. In other words, normally we'd simply translate this as any man, right? Ish. But it says a man. Lelamedcha. This teaches you, shemoelet, that the woman actually breaks faith, bishtayim, with two men, quote. Be'ish milchama, right? Shalmala. And this is the way God is referred to in the Shirat Hayam, in the Song of the Red Sea. God is referred to as Ish milchama, a man of war. So there's the word Ish referring to God, Shalmala meaning above, right? The man above. The Isha meaning her husband, milmata, below. This, I realize that this is a somewhat countercultural idea, but adultery, as you know, is one of the 10 commandments. Sad to say, I make an assumption that it is relatively common and has been relatively common even before the sexual revolution. And that is the very reason why the Torah puts such a high level of consequence to doing that, to committing it. Because on the one hand, there's a part of us that doesn't want to take it as something so serious, and yet, in fact, it is something so serious. Ki tiste ishto. So Rashi's going over almost every phrase of the sentence, right? If his wife breaks faith, goes astray. Shanu rabutenu. So this word with shorter means a fool and a crazy person. So they're taking, even though this is tiste, and a sin is not the same letter as a shin, there's just a dot in between. So there's a way of remembering, there's a cute way of remembering which one of these letters, because it's easy to confuse them, right? How do you know which one is a sin? And the answer is because sin is never right. And of course, the dot on the shin is on the right side and the sin is on the left side. So because sin is never right, that's how you know this is not pronounced shin, it's pronounced, this is not pronounced shin, it's pronounced shin. So going on. Shanu Rabotenu, our sages taught, Ein Mehaminafim, sorry, I'm sorry, this is noafin. It's just very difficult for me to read. These two letters are sort of fused, but it means Ein Haminaafin noafin. Adulterers do not commit adultery. Ad shetikanes bahem ruach shtut. There's the play on words. Until a spirit of foolishness enters them. In other words, it's such a stupid thing to do. And I so remember, Monica Lewinsky, after this whole scandal broke out, and I remember her saying and hearing her say, it was so stupid. It's interesting. Dichtiv, as it says, and there's support of this, ki, and I've got to remember how, ki tiste, right? It says, uchtiv bo, and it says in the text, ki tiste, uchtiv bo, and regarding it, it says in Proverbs chapter 7, no'ef isha, one who commits adultery with a woman, chaser lev, it means literally lacks heart. That's what it literally means, but it would be translated as is devoid of understanding. So the lave is understood, the heart is understood as being that part of our anatomy in which we gain understanding or experience understanding. Upshuto shel mikra, and the simple meaning of this scriptural verse, ki tiste, taking this word ki tiste, tat midarche tzniut. She turns away from the ways of modesty. I think this is, the techashed be'enav, and she becomes, lachashod means to suspect someone, and she becomes suspicious in his eyes. And I believe that part of the understanding is that the husband has seen her to some extent consort with the man involved. So, and when I say that, it means that he sees that she's spending a lot of time with him, or spending time with him. So it's not his spirit of jealousy isn't just sort of out of the blue. It comes because he has reason to be suspicious. And what Rashi's telling us is because she is no longer acting in a modest way. And he gives an example, Kamo, okay? I'm going to the Sotah me'alav, maybe Sateh me'alav va'avor, which means turn away from him, from it, and pass by. I'd have to look. This is also from the book of Proverbs. And the book of Proverbs, I can tell you in general, has very, very difficult Hebrew. So this is one place in chapter 4. And let's take a look at the next quote he has, which is also from Proverbs. Al yest, or el, yeah, I mean, again, how to exactly pronounce this, I'd have to look back at Sefaria to see it actually pointed. These are more difficult words for me to figure out how to point them. Al could be, so this is set. Lauren, if you have the vowels there, you can help me out. El
Don't have vowels.
Okay, let me quickly look, if you'll forgive me, I will look quickly at Sefaria and see what it says. Forgive me. Let's go back to where this is.
If anyone can turn to
Oh,
Proverbs 7:25.
So it's al yest. That's how you pronounce it. Al yest el dracheha libecha. That's how I have the Sefaria with the pronunciation in it. So, okay. So that's how you pronounce that. So do not allow your heart to turn aside to her ways. So again, he's taking every phrase, right? He says, and breaks faith with her, right? Umahu hamal. So what exactly Rashi's saying, and the Torah is not going to tell us exactly what it was that she did to break faith with him. So let me look. Okay. There is going on now.
Wait a
Rabbi
second,
Judith's
mine
got
has
a
more.
question.
Okay, let me stop here and go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Go on.
ahead. You want to go ahead, Golda?
No, Judith has a question, or she's got her hand up.
Judith,
But
I couldn't see.
It's been up since you talked about putting your hand
putting
up.
your hand up, so I don't know if she still needs to
before
do
the-
it or not. So never mind.
Okay, no comment. Yeah, go ahead,
No,
Laura.
my Rashi has the next line, but after what you said in about her treachery, it says B'shachav ish otah.
The next verse, yes.
No, well,
That's the
okay.
third verse.
Oh, I see, but that is actually both the next verse and part of my final Rashi on the last verse, and it says, "What is her treachery?" And a man lay with her carnally. So I guess maybe that is a predictive Rashi.
Well, I think what Rashi's doing is quoting, right? Quoting the Torah. That's what it is. So he's filling in your version of the Rashi is filling in how the Torah states what it is, because that's exactly what we're going to do. The mind does not repeat it. It just goes to the next verse. And it's possible that early editions of Rashi may not have had the verse numbers in. It's possible. So, V'shachav ish ota, a man has lain with her, shichvat zera. So this literally it means the lyings of seed. So in other words, carnal relations. Has had carnal relations with her. V'ne'elam me'enei isha, and her husband has not seen it. It is hidden from the eyes of her husband. No witnesses about this. V'nistera, she has acted in secret, or this act was a secret. It could be v'nistera, meaning she acted in secret, but I'm wondering if it could refer to the act itself. But anyway, that would depend on the gender of the word act. Vehi, and she, nitma'a, has become defiled. The aid ein ba. Look at all these conditions, right? And there is no witness. There is no witness. Vehi lo nitpasa, and she was not taken by force. In other words, this was a consensual act. That's all important in terms of using the waters to test her. So all these conditions have to be met in order to administer this particular procedure.
Well, what I wanted to say earlier, sorry,
Sure.
and it comes up again now, is that this is focused on the woman. We are not going after the man who does this. We're going after the woman. The test is against the woman. There's not a sense of, it's not even-handed. And I think it's, this is where in some ways privilege comes in. I don't think there's even a consciousness that it's not even-handed.
Okay, I didn't want to cut you off. All right. So I think the reason here has nothing to do with even-handedness. It has to do simply because this is what we're dealing with. And it's not to suggest that the man who committed adultery is off the hook. We know that when it comes to adultery, they're not equal situations, right? If the man is married or unmarried, if he commits adultery, it means he is having relations with a married woman. He can be single, he can be married, makes no difference. On the other hand, the woman has to be married. Unless she's married, it's not a situation of adultery. Now that's just a different subject. The man is not tested in this way, But if I'm not mistaken, and please forgive me, there are so many details, it's hard for me always to hang on to all of them, as you've already seen, and there are times when I make mistakes. But it seems to me that the man has to be forgiven. So that's just in terms of the Torah text itself. Judith, I would tell you that if you actually read the tractate Sotah, it gives you a very different sense of what's going on here. If there is privilege, there's also responsibility. And what I think is the sense of justice has to do with the responsibilities that go along and the ability to do your job and take care of your responsibilities. I'm not here to defend it to that degree. I'd probably be unsuccessful. But regardless, I just think we need to keep a bit of not to say that you don't have it, but a somewhat of an open mind and just let this go. And I said these are difficult things. And what you're raising is in fact one of the difficulties. Okay. But for whatever, I mean, we're just getting the information right now. But I would say that to draw conclusions prior to studying the oral tradition regarding this, because the oral Torah is considered to be just as valid as the written Torah, and in fact, it is the application of written Torah. So it's terribly important to understand it in that context. And if you want to respond, I'm certainly open. If you feel I'm being unfair.
No, I mean, I don't, okay. Everything has its cultural context. It's one of the circumstances that alters cases. But we've come to understand what wasn't understood is that when you do everything from a male perspective, it's not balanced.
Yes.
And, Rashi was absolutely brilliant, purposeful, focused, God-fearing, and had blinders in this. You don't know they're blinders, but they're real.
Okay, I know we can probably go on with this indefinitely, as in terms of the general subject. I would say that any man who doesn't consult a woman, and certainly if he's married, and Rashi was married, okay, Abraham was married, Isaac was married, Jacob had 2 wives and let's say 4 wives actually ultimately, right? And doesn't consult with his wife is an idiot. I'll go that far, and I don't like using such strong language. But I would think that they would talk about it. Rashi had daughters, he didn't have any sons. There are stories about his daughters being educated, etc., etc. Yes, I appreciate very much what you're saying about context and circumstances, and I think perhaps that's as best as we can leave it. But I would agree with you 100% that not to consult or not to consider things from the woman's point of view is a big mistake and is unbalanced. I agree. No argument from me there. All right, going on. So, v'shachav ish otah. And a man has lain with her. And now he's quoting from the tractate Sotah. Ish, in other words. So now we're starting to define how we're going to apply this law. Ish prat lakatan. So if the Torah says he's a man, it means to exclude a minor. To exclude a minor. If this has happened with a minor, this is not going to count. This particular law does not apply. That is, using the waters in this case, or mi she'eno ish, or something that is not a man, meaning an animal. So it's interesting. I mean, I have to tell you, nothing new under the sun when it comes to this kind of stuff. Sad to say, but we don't apply this law in those cases. So here we go. It says ota shichvat zera, her a lying of seed, right? Carnal relations. And this is now a quote from Yevamot, from the tractate Yevamot, at page 95. Shchivata poselet ota. So it says her, she, so it says ota. We're dealing with now the fact that it says, it doesn't say simply v'shachav ish shichat zera, but the fact that it emphasizes the ota, I believe, is what we're working on right now. And it says shchivata poselet ota. Her sexual intercourse makes her, makes the marriage invalid. He will not be able to, they will no longer have, the husband and the wife will no longer engage in intercourse, okay? Ve'en shchivat achota, and her sister's shchiva, poselet ota is going to be the word, I would imagine, okay, right, does not render her unfit. This is like the story told regarding two sisters, Shayu Domot Zo Lazo, who resembled each other. And this is the Tanhuma, and I actually looked up the source, and I will show you the source. I'm going to put in a new share and see if I can show you that source in English. Let me see first of all if I can get it easily. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Make sure I have it. There we go. This shows you the original source. So we're going to be looking at the Tanhuma in a second. So, sorry. Let's see if I can do this. Yes, here it is. I'm going to share it with you right now. There it is. So this is from the Tanhuma, you can see, all right? And here it's quoting V'shachav ish ota shichvat zera. That's the verse we're looking at, right? Okay, here's the story. There is a story about two sisters who resembled each other. Now one was married in one city and the other was married in another city. The husband of one of them wanted to accuse her of infidelity and have her drink the bitter water in Jerusalem. So apparently, by the way, hopefully not to spoil the story, she was guilty, by the way, she was. At any rate, she went to that city where her married sister was. Her sister said to her, "What was your reason for coming here?" She said to her, "My husband wants to have me drink the bitter water." Her sister said to her, "I will go in your place and drink it." She said to her, "Go." So in other words, the sister wasn't guilty of this. So, there wasn't any fear involved. There's a lot of psychology at play going on here, all right? So she said to her, "Go." She put on her sister's clothes. This is the sister, went in her place, drank the bitter water, and was found clean. Nothing happened, right? When she returned to her sister's house, she joyfully went out to meet her, then embraced and kissed her on the mouth. As soon as the one kissed the other, she smelled the bitter water and immediately died, in order to fulfill what is stated in Ecclesiastes 8:8. No human has control over the wind to contain the wind. And of course, there it's talking about breath. Nor is there control on the day of death. Very tough story. I mean, I'm giving it to you in its, uncleaned up version, but that's the story here. So anyway, we'll go back to the original. I believe this is it. So that's the story he's referring to. He just gives us the reference. Very tough material to deal with, I have to say. So, V'ne'elam me'inei isha, and it was hidden from her husband's eyes, right? So interesting how they take this, right? Again, I feel that the rabbis aren't eager to apply this law. And so they're finding ways in which to interpret it in a very narrow sense. Okay. Prat le sumeh. This excludes a blind. So because it says it's hidden from the eyes of her husband. Okay, well, if he doesn't have eyes, quote, because he's blind, this doesn't apply. We cannot apply. So we can't apply this law. Okay. Believe me, I had to look this up. This is so hard. The print is so smudged there. Ha'im haya ro'eh. So here we go. So here he is. He is sighted, right? If he was a sighted person, aim, and he ignored the law. And there are Sfarim Acherim, means there are other manuscripts or versions that say alim, means to conceal. Ein hamayim bodkim ota. In that case, the water is not capable of examining her, of checking her, of testing her. So all these contexts in which are necessary to make it happen. But I'm going to have to ask someone to please mute. So this means she did it in the, she is secluded. She's in seclusion, right? So they understand this word to imply, or sorry, letumat. Got to go on with another word, bi'ah. In other words, she has to have sequestered herself with this man, with this other man, with enough time. If she just goes in and out, or in other words, you have to figure out the amount of time it takes to engage in sexual intercourse. If she hasn't gone in for that length of time, this is not going to happen. The waters are not going, this whole thing is not going to work. Ve'ed ein ba, there being no witness, right? Ha'im yesh ba afilu eid echad. So it says, so in that case, even if there is one witness, she'amar nate, that can come and testify that she was in fact defiled, lo haita shota. She would not drink the waters. If there was one witness who had actually seen her go in, sequester herself with this other man, and for the length of time it would take to engage in sexual intercourse, she is now forbidden to her husband. No waters involved. Okay, so the case itself would still be an adjudicated case. It would have to go to trial, etc., etc. But we would not be applying this particular procedure. The aid ein ba, and there is no witness regarding her. But tum'ah, so this has to do with, we're talking about the amount of time it would take to, in fact, engage. Aval yesh edim v'stira, but if there are witnesses that she met him privately, okay, then I believe we're saying it would apply. They would in fact perform this test. Okay, nitpasa. This is the last word, right? Nitpasa means literally court. But we understand that mean ne'enasa, meaning raped, forced. That she was not, this again, would not do these sorts of things if she were forced. And he gives the example of another place where it uses that word, where it says it refers to a situation of rape. The tafsa, the man held onto her, he grabbed her, the shachav ima, and he lay with her. So there's the tafsa to mean he raped her. So that is it for today. And let me put in the marking for tomorrow. Challenging material, to say the least. And I'm going to stop the share. And I'm going to also stop the recording on that note. And